What is the feeling of shouting the names of the four gods and killing their followers? This is the story of an unlucky person thrown into a war zone that has not been officially recorded, jumping face of the Chaos Four Gods. Double storyline, the main world is a 40k story, and the dungeon branch is a gradual exploration of the 30k truth. Only includes Warhammer settings and no other additives, special ability. The gaze mechanism sponsored by Emperor Friendship. This book contains the following seasonings. Undercurrent, large-scale military campaigns, farming, and group portrait narratives centered around the protagonist. Keywords of the novel. Warhammer. I live without pop-ups under the gaze of the gods. Warhammer. I live under the gaze of the gods. Download the complete text. Warhammer. I live under the gaze of the gods. Latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Remaining Hope. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Remaining Hope 999.m41 With the fall of the fortress world of Cartier and the opening of the Great Rift, an era has come to an end. The light of the star torch can no longer illuminate the entire empire as usual. After the end of the eternal night cataclysm, a crimson fissure split the entire galaxy in half. As one of the few channels that can stably cross major cracks, the strategic significance of guarding the Star Wars zone suddenly became extremely significant. As a result, the Empire deployed a large number of troops to this region. Unfortunately, such benefits did not come to the Frankish region located next to the Guardianship Star. The Shadow Domain, the dark side of the Empire. 000.m42 Misty Star Domain. Shadow Covering Universe Domain. Frank 3 Planet, Half-Nested World, the gray sky enveloped the entire Frank. 3. Industrial waste has already completely destroyed the entire ecosystem of Frank. 3. As expected by Carl, famine and war will soon completely destroy the remaining order on the entire Frank. 3, but fortunately, currently only Carl knows about these news. Due to the cross-galactic communication through psychic means, astrological communication has been completely disrupted by the emergence of large fissures. Except for Carl, the traveler, no one on board Frank. 3 knows exactly what happened. Unfortunately, he did not receive any system. Even he couldn't remember his past clearly. At present, Carl can only rely on some inexplicable babbling in his mind. Fortunately, it seems that these babbling words have no intention of harming him. Is it called babbling just because it's a bit annoying? At this thought, he shook his head suddenly and temporarily threw the noise in his mind out of the playback queue. Carefully pry open the half-decayed wooden floor in front of me with a rusty iron rod. With a creaking sound, a dusty iron box appeared before Carl's eyes. Open it, open it. At the moment he saw the iron box, the barely suppressed babbling echoed in his ears once again. In fact, he is well aware of Warhammer world, which he has a slight understanding of. If I open this box, I'm probably a human. But unfortunately, Carl has no other choice. He is well aware that what he will face next is not as simple as famine or war. Compared to those real enemies, these are not even appetizers right now. Anyway, both ends are dead, it's better to give it a try. Thinking of this, he took a deep breath of industrial waste gas mixed with decay and dust. Gao Gao smashed the rusty iron rod in his hand towards the same rusty lock. Dong, accompanied by the splashing iron oxide, the rusted iron rod finally completed its final mission. Meanwhile, Carl's heart also rose to his throat. Grasp the iron box with both hands, which has become rough due to rust, and gently lift it up through a gap. Through the yellowed electric light behind him, he saw the treasure inside the box for the first time. Fortunately, Carl did not lose the bet this time. At least no major demons or monsters were released. But equally, he did not win the bet. Apart from a long yellowed parchment book and 10,000 Imperial Eagle coins, there is nothing else. Leaving aside that bizarre book, Carl focused most of his attention on this huge sum of money. Although Frank III circulated his own currency, he also recognized the Empire's Skyhawk coin. Generally, the exchange of goods between planets, including the 11 taxes, is mainly based on the payment of physical goods, but a small amount of Tianyin coins still bear the role of small transactions and pricing units. Self-established. At the official Frankish exchange rate of one-day eagle coin. 10,000 francs. This huge sum can be exchanged for over 100 million francs. If placed in ordinary circumstances, this was enough for him to quickly enter the upper echelons of the Frankish Empire and spend hundreds of years comfortably. Unfortunately, Karl, who knew the situation, even felt that this amount of money was far from enough. Even if you have a lot of wealth, in the eyes of the chaotic army that follows, it is just a head with golden teeth. However, as the saying goes, even the smallest mosquito legs are still flesh. Although this 10,000 Skyhawk coin cannot solve the problem of the Chaos Army, at least it is enough to solve his current dry belly. Even if he is willing to take another gamble. 100 million francs is enough to hire a small cargo ship that is not afraid of death, and without the guidance of a star torch, it forcefully broke into the subspace. Randomly appearing in unknown locations throughout the galaxy, but just as star torches are important for interstellar navigation in subspaces. This completely random navigation is basically no different from dying. So unless absolutely necessary, Karl will never accept this method. After some contemplation, he could only turn his gaze to the nearby parchment book. Carefully took out the parchment book from the box and placed it under the flickering electric light above his head. The first thing that caught Karl's eye was a large mechanical guild icon. A huge gear with half skull and half mechanical head in the middle. But soon, he discovered something was wrong. There are obvious signs of heresy on the outer ring of this gear. The area around the originally square gear icon has been partially smoothed out. This makes the entire gear look quite similar to the blasphemous icons left by some of the four gods. This sudden discovery startled Karl, who was about to flip through this parchment book, into a clever state. Karl is very clear about what the four gods represent. It is precisely because of this that he dare not even contemplate the names and taboos of those four terrifying beings in his mind. Even from just crossing over to now, he has been subconsciously hinting not to actively think about those beings. But unfortunately, only 1,000 days of being a thief, there is no 1,000-day anti-thief. Just a momentary negligence allowed Karl to experience the specialties of Warhammer world for the first time. This time, countless true babbling words were directly infused into his mind by unknown entities. Endless illusion, a sea of corpses and blood, the pinnacle of desire, and a land of plague and joy. At this moment, Karl even began to miss the initial babbling. Oh no, that thing can't even be called babbling. I can be considered a nagging old man. But all of this is meaningless for Karl. At this moment, only endless fear remained in his mind. The brainwashing scenes prepared for interstellar warriors are simply beyond Karl's ability as a 3K ordinary person. The brain is buzzing. Endless pain made him fall directly to the ground and gather into a ball. Just as Karl felt his brain, which was being held in his hands, was about to explode, the initial, holy sound echoed back in his mind. In an instant, all the crazy scenes and crazy babbling came to an abrupt end. Karl found himself back in the familiar cold nest. Open it, open it. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Mechanical Canon. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Mechanical Canon == Preface to the Mechanical Order Canon == We know that every fleeting form of life is a gear in the great mechanism. Get rid of the weak flesh and blood, and accept the glory of the mechanical God. We are aware that the great secrets revealed by the God of machines to believers will overshadow the weakness of mortals. Our hands can create everything in the universe. Knowledge is immortal. Knowledge is solemn and sacred. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is hope. After reading the first page of the yellowed parchment book, Carl's whole body ignited. He knows very well what the book in his hand is. As long as he can make good use of the knowledge recorded in it, Carl can even become a person like Belisarius Cole. Note: Belisarius Cole. The great sage lord, the chief spokesperson of the Om Messiah, Kiraman's wishing machine, the first member of the brain choir, Kadola, no, to be precise, it should be. Becoming a presence far beyond Belisarius Cole. But soon he started to ache. Carl discovered an extremely serious problem. He couldn't understand this thing himself. Apart from the preface and table of contents at the beginning, this mechanical scripture does not speak a word of human language. Countless intertwined patterns and various incomprehensible formulas filled the remaining space of parchment. But just as Carl looked bewildered, the familiar, holy voice rang out again. Fortunately, it was as if the speaker had suddenly been repaired. Suddenly, a thick middle-aged man's voice popped out of his mind. Hope to exchange knowledge, eliminate threats with weapons, cleanup brings hope, chaos conspiracy, the web has been destroyed, the past is no longer. Although hope may be slim, the sword of judgment never leaves me. Visitors from the past, may you once again save the empire and humanity. Accompanied by a majestic voice, golden rays of light emanated from the yellowed parchment books. Like a blazing fire, the entire parchment book quickly burned out in front of Carl. And Carl, who was at the center of the entire golden flame storm, stood still in place even though the flames had been extinguished for a long time. It feels like being in the ocean of knowledge. The previously incomprehensible patterns began to arrange and combine themselves in Carl's mind. Countless knowledge began to be memorized and understood by him. Carl has never felt so comfortable before. At this moment in his mind, there were no more doubts in the world. The speed of confusion cannot keep up with the speed of Carl's knowledge expansion. But pleasure is ultimately short-lived. At the moment he reached his peak, this satisfaction instantly turned into endless emptiness. Outside the known boundaries, there is only endless unknowns waiting for him. The tight feeling of rapid braking almost made him catch his breath. Fortunately, Carl now understands. What I have in front of me is only a small part of the mechanical religious scripture. This is also normal, after all, it's just a parchment book. Even if a lot of reused techniques are used above, it is impossible to record all the knowledge of human civilization to this day. But for now, these are enough. As long as the rail shipyard starts construction, everything will be fine. How many years does it take to build a warship? As long as the ground tank factory starts working, my advantage lies in me. There won't be any food left in half a month. That won't work. Let's start by creating a plantation. In short, the advancement of knowledge has indeed given Carl many new ideas. But no matter how he tries to save himself, there is an insurmountable obstacle in front of him. The four gods. Geeky. A representative of wisdom and strategy. Fear of abuse. A representative of bravery and integrity. Say and I. A representative of satisfaction and happiness. Negu. A representative of contentment and happiness. Sorry for taking the wrong script. Geeky. The god of deceit. Fear of cruelty. The god of slaughter. Say and I. God of desire. Negu. God of plague. Once the four gods discover Carl's behavior, they will inevitably make targeted deployments. He even had no doubt that some things that didn't speak of martial arts and used big tricks to bully small things would jump over and give him a thumbs up. Fortunately, the Emperor did not intend to have Carl die directly. Before leaving, the Emperor threw 400 points of hope to Carl as start-up funds. So after analyzing the current situation, he waved his hand directly. Use all the power of hope to clear the gaze values of the four gods first. After all, he doesn't dare to go shopping with 4 100% gaze values. Carl attribute table fund. 10,000 tianying coins power of hope. 0 fierce fixation value. 0% terrorist gaze value. 0% colorful gaze value. 0% scale fixation value. 0% skill. Mechanical Canon knowledge base 1/10 feeling the power of hope bathing his whole body. Carlton felt refreshed. My waist is not sore anymore, my legs anyway. Now Carl is going to achieve the first small goal of his grand plan. Go and exchange some money first. Although it is indeed a bit low, it is also an unavoidable thing. Who knows that Di Chao doesn't even recognize this currency? After carefully stuffing 100 Skyhawk coins with a face value of 100 into his bag, Carl began to think about the next question. How can I safely exchange for the corresponding franc? Obviously, it is not feasible to go directly to the bank on the nest. Glancing at my tattered attire. A tattered second-hand orange work uniform, paired with the smell of not taking a shower for months. Carl is very certain that he may not even be able to get into the nest. Note: the nest is divided into 4 levels. Spire, political game. Upper nest, enjoying life. Lower nest, working. Bottom nest, social waste, and it would be even more unrealistic to go find those gangs in the underworld. As the saying goes, wealth is not revealed, and a man is innocent and guilty. Carl doesn't think these gang members in the underworld are any good youths. Thinking of this, he finally began to seriously recall the background of the former owner of this body for the first time. Then Carl discovered that the owner of the body with the same name as himself was just an orphan. I used to be a factory worker in Shechao. In an accident, both feet were paralyzed due to high-temperature steam spraying. The unscrupulous boss, in order to evade responsibility, directly hired the bottom nest Black Mouse gang to deal with former Carl. And the rest of the story, Carl doesn't know. Wait, that badge. Suddenly, Carl seemed to have found a breakthrough point in his dusty memory. That logo won't be wrong. Before being knocked unconscious, a familiar symbol appeared in Carl's memory. A capital I with a skull in the middle. That's the symbol of the trial court. Although I don't know why this gameplay will hang a card in the next nest, Carl seems to understand the hidden meaning in the previous communication. Time is tight. After a simple activity, the body was not yet familiar. Carl immediately prepared to leave this already dilapidated compartment. But just as he was still thinking about how to find his way, a strange face appeared behind the rusty door that creaked open. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Corpse of Acne Rash. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Corpse of Acne Rash accompanied by the rusty iron door slowly opening upwards, a pungent stench spread across the surface. This foul odor is different from the year-round non-bathing odor on the body of the original owner of Carl. That thing is definitely not human. Damn it, has chaos corrosion started to erupt? Although there may indeed be some mutated organisms in the nest, this acne rash zombie, which has already completely decayed and covered in herpes, did not meet Carl's expectations. But now Carl doesn't have time to think about these big events at the moment. The most important thing at the moment is how to deal with the acne rash zombie in front of me, who is eager to share the love of his father with Carl. Whispering, rustling. The pimple rash emitted an inexplicable roar from the corpse's mouth. And at the same time, the gray-yellow corpse began to limp towards him. This way, if he were to do anything, he would probably be overwhelmed by the whole thing. But now he is not in a hurry. A complete escape plan had already taken shape in his mind at the moment when the stench spread. Carl did not retreat when facing the walking corpse walking straight towards him. Because he knows his weight very well. This thin and weak body cannot defeat the zombie in front of it. Even if we can barely fight a win-win situation, we cannot survive from subsequent infections. After all, this thing may seem like an infection on the surface, but its essence is the corruption of chaos. And he, who had personally experienced corruption, was well aware of the terror of this thing. Although it is currently unknown whether being simply scratched will lead to corruption, he has learned from the stories of certain pathogens in the past what it means to be cautious. Try your best to suppress your inner fear while taking a deep breath and waiting for the zombie to approach. Squeezing, popping, popping. The heavy footsteps of the zombies trampled on the already decaying wooden floor, making a piercing and heavy sound. The inexplicable roar of zombies mixed in between is even more chilling. His calves were trembling slightly. These legs, which the original owner had not used for 6 months, were easily repaired by the Emperor, but they still made him uneasy. Controlling a completely unfamiliar body was already enough to make him feel flustered. The current situation belongs to being filled with negative buffs. But at this moment, he can only die as a living horse doctor. The door is not far from his location, about less than 10 meters away. Quickly, the zombie walked in front of him with a 6 relatives do not recognize pace. When the zombie ran to the last meter or so, it seemed that it was because it smelled an exciting scent that made the zombie excited. In an instant, the pace of the zombie increased. As if wanting to give Carl a fatherly hug, the zombie flew straight towards him. Seize the timing and completely disregard the risk of scalding your left hand. Directly remove the overhead light and quickly flash it aside. The zombie, who could no longer stop the car, gave a friendly hug to the 2 hanging wires. In an instant, a nauseating burnt smell spread throughout the room. At the same time, Carl also took advantage of the situation and quickly slipped out of this low building. Returned to the damp and dark passage of the nest. The damp and hot feeling made him feel extremely uncomfortable, but there was nothing he could do. After all, the bottom nest has always been like this. He tiptoed forward with small steps, taking advantage of the dim lighting on the surrounding walls. After all, Carl doesn't want to provoke those ghosts now. But unfortunately, besides the zombies, there is another trump card in the bottom nest. Getting lost. These super nests often have a history of thousands of years. Built layer by layer on the initial open space. In addition to the main load-bearing columns, countless buildings are built directly above the upper floor. Accumulated over the years, they have become nests on the planet. And these complex and overlapping design drawings are even more difficult for professional engineers to understand. And in addition, it has a long history in multiple renovations. It is not surprising that the lower and lower parts of the nest eventually become a giant maze. And the Black Mouse gang took advantage of this and directly found a hidden place to dispose of these garbage that needs to be dealt with. Anyway, those garbage won't come back. At least Carl guessed that the Black Mouse gang did not completely destroy the owner of the previous body. Coincidentally, getting out of this maze doesn't seem like a difficult task for him. In the previous knowledge transmission, he was fortunate enough to touch upon some architectural knowledge. Although the entire building structure of the bottom nest is not yet clear, he has been constantly exploring and has roughly guessed the structural diagram of this area based on the routing rules of the pipes. However, this leads to good news and bad news. The good news is that he has found the direction to go out. Based on the area wiring diagram he has explored, it appears that this was once a sewage treatment block. According to the general design criteria, as long as the main inlet of the sewage treatment tank is found, it can climb back to the upper level along the pipeline. The bad news is, judging from the humid and hot channel environment around, this sewage treatment tank seems to be still in use. This means it seems a bit difficult to climb out in the opposite direction along these pipes. And judging from the corruption that has already begun to spread. At this time, choosing to go to places like sewage treatment tanks is a bit like using lanterns to go to the toilet. Looking for feces, dead. But unfortunately, after Carl endured his hunger and walked for about half a day, he reluctantly realized that he really didn't have a choice. Perhaps if we continue to move forward, we can indeed explore other blocks. But his body couldn't hold on anymore. Dampness, darkness, high temperature, foul odor, low oxygen content. Long-term action in such an environment is too torturous for Carl, whose health is already not very good. But he is not a rascal either. Before going to the sewage treatment pool, he decided to make 2 handy ones for himself. As for the materials. For a mechanical sage-level person, self-proclaimed, a semi-abandoned sewage treatment block is simply a treasure trove. So after some tinkering, he prepared himself with a set of beginner's initial equipment. This includes a waterproof bag, to hold money, a simple helmet with flashlight function. A bleeding dagger hidden in the pocket of a garment. A laser gun with a single magazine that can only fire 2 shots. Not available underwater, a set of 1-piece diving suits with decent sealing. 2 oxygen tanks. For spare batteries, waterproof, so after a brief inspection of the equipment, Carl immediately packed up and prepared to set off. A day has already passed by now. The buff of Emperor's blessing has long dissipated. The accompanying hunger is tormenting him crazily. At this moment, knowing the situation, he dared not even eat those mutated mice and bats. But it was only after he finally used a short circuit to successfully open the door of the sewage treatment tank. A sound of chewing on meat chunks came from behind the slowly opening metal door. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. The Gourd Retriever. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. The Gourd Retriever. Fortunately, simply from the source of the sound, there should only be one unknown creature inside. Therefore, Carl did not immediately disconnect the circuit that had just been short-circuited. After all, in that case, once the heavy gate is slammed down hard, even he cannot guarantee that this thing will still open next time. But he didn't dare to be careless either. After turning on the flashlight on his helmet, he tightly grasped the homemade laser rifle in his hand. And for some reason, the sound inside the door suddenly stopped abruptly. At this moment, sweat had already soaked his palms. An extremely dangerous premonition crazily stimulated his nerves. Breathing began to become rapid, and hands began to tremble slightly. He is very aware of his current situation, but he has no other choice. The sound of the huge iron door opening will soon attract countless monsters to come. This is his only chance to survive. Thinking of this, he slowly exhaled the foul-smelling gas he had just inhaled. Start forcing your breathing to slow down. After all, for a simple homemade laser rifle with only 2 rounds of fault tolerance, any mistake is enough to send it into the arms of a loving father. But when the door was completely opened, the expected monster did not appear. On the floor with yellow pus, there was only half of a corpse that had been bitten to the point of being unrecognizable. However, he didn't dare to be careless. After all, the danger warning in his mind has never subsided from the moment the door was opened until now. If it were a non-emergency situation, he would never step into this door. After all, in those corners that cannot be illuminated by lights, there must be countless terrifying mutated creatures hidden. But this time, he had no choice. There is no room for maneuver either. Carefully stepping on the dark yellow pus on the ground, he raised his gun and advanced. The flickering dark yellow lights around him also made him feel uneasy due to unstable voltage. In the absence of the enemy's active appearance, he decided to prioritize checking the body. After all, one can roughly infer the enemy they will face from the wound information of the corpse. Of course, he also dared not concentrate his main attention. Just using the residual light of my gaze, I glanced at the corpse on the ground with the yellowed electric light. Don't look, don't know, I'm scared at first glance. The incomplete body, which is only half left, is covered with various bite marks. And judging from the scratch, the opponent's body size is definitely larger than an ordinary person. But just when he wanted to continue analyzing, a wolf howl echoed throughout the entire empty hall, startling him to be clever. Immediately raise your gun and look around. But unfortunately, the entire entrance is too big. The limited light of a flashlight cannot illuminate any meaningful information. And just as he was sweating profusely and nervous, a worse situation suddenly occurred. The originally flickering lights suddenly completely dimmed. And this time, there seems to be no intention of lighting up again in a short period of time. And at this moment, the monster hiding in the shadow of the flashlight finally took action. The piercing roar echoed throughout the empty hall. The layered echoes seriously disrupted his search for enemies. When he finally identified the source of the sound and turned off the lights, this dirt hound has entered the sprint stage. A pair of fangs stained with dark green mucus shone brightly under the reflection of a white flashlight. The increasingly loud roar no longer ravaged Carl's courage and reason at any moment. Fortunately, he had already been taught a lesson by a smallpox zombie. So at this moment, his crisis management ability is already considered inexperienced. At least it won't be given away like the corpse on the ground. At first, he instinctively wanted to turn around and shoot with a laser rifle. But unfortunately, he didn't have time to aim by now. Helpless, he could only concentrate all his strength on his left foot and kick fiercely towards the ground. Feeling a foul-smelling gust of wind howling by my side, he breathed a deep sigh of relief. After landing on his right shoulder, he took advantage of the situation and completed a rolling unloading force on the sticky and slippery floor. Then, disregarding the sticky liquid all over his body, he knelt down on one knee and took aim in the direction of the howling wind. But unfortunately, under the limited light of the flashlight, he didn't see anything. And due to having only 2 bullets, he dared not attempt to shoot indiscriminately. He is well aware that such evasions may have been useful a few times before. Once the other party reacts, their fate is definitely no better than that half of the body on the ground. The noisy roar echoed in the dark hall. Countless echoes have once again become piercing. He knew that the other party had once again started charging. And this time he didn't choose to avoid. Within a few seconds, the roar behind him began to become unusually loud. He knew that the other party had once again entered a sprint state. Listening to the approaching footsteps, he first turned his body towards the precise direction of the sound source. Then he put his feet forward and backward in an impact-resistant position, and began to count down secretly in his heart. 3, 2, 1, 0. Just as he reached 0, Carl pushed his laser rifle forward forcefully. In an instant, a huge impact force spread throughout his body along his arm. Fortunately, he made an impact-resistant posture in advance. As a result, he immediately stabilized the laser rifle in his hand after just a stumble. On the other hand, the dirt hound is not as lucky. In fact, the Negu hound is not as big as Carl had anticipated. The main attribute of the Nasser hound, which focuses on agility in sneak attacks, is its flexibility. And the previous unlucky guy, who was ambushed by a dirt hound from behind, had a much deeper wound than expected. So this unexpected push directly pushed the Negu hound into a stiff state. And just as the dog struggled to turn over, Carl's laser rifle sight had already locked onto the dog's forehead. There was no unnecessary communication, as he pulled the trigger in his hand. A scorching stream of red particles directly pierced through the head of the dirt hound. A burnt black hole emitting a foul smell of spoiled grilled meat appeared on the forehead of the Nasser hound. Quickly, the dirt hound fell to the ground and stopped twitching. The crisis was resolved, and Carl sat down on the ground, panting heavily. The moment just now was truly thrilling. That push, whichever comes later or earlier, he will definitely die. This is risking one's life. Because he knows that blindly dodging won't solve any problems. In situations where it is impossible to effectively search for enemies, it is oneself who will inevitably die if entangled. Only by risking one's life can there be a glimmer of hope. It seems to be praising his bravery. The dim yellow lights flickering around lit up again. As the lights lit up, a person wearing a black robe and a mask walked slowly towards Carl from a distance. "Not bad, not bad, I really appreciate your courage." End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Forensic Judge and Servant Franco. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Former judge's servant Franco. In just an instant, Carl's gaze value for fear and abuse in his mind increased by 10%. He was scared and froze in place. However, he was also unsure whether this was the increase in gaze value from his own hunting of the Nega hound, or the ghost caused by the unknown black-clothed man in front of him. There's no way, the current information is too limited. So Carl decided to temporarily observe the changes. However, Carl secretly prepared for his life and silently replaced his laser rifle with a new battery. Seeing Carl not responding, the black-robed man took off his mask and lit a cigarette. After enjoying a deep breath, I began to introduce myself. My name is Franco. Today someone reported that the processing equipment was shut down. They asked me to come down and see what happened. At this point, Franco took out his ID and a compressed biscuit from his backpack behind him and held them up in front of Carl. This is my employment certificate, let's believe it now. Looking at the scarred face that was still within the normal range after the mask, Carl finally breathed a sigh of relief. Although Carl couldn't distinguish whether the document in Franco's hand was real or fake, the compressed biscuit had already caught Carl's entire attention. In an instant, the hunger that had been suppressed all day before burst out. The Emperor's blessings are at most spiritual nourishment. It can make you temporarily forget the pain of your body, forget hunger, cold, and fatigue. But this spiritual nourishment ultimately cannot solve practical problems. So in the moment he saw the compressed biscuits, Carl completely surrendered. Even if you die, you can't be a starving ghost. However, during the process of receiving the compressed biscuits, Carl's left hand still did not leave the laser rifle in his hand. Seeing this, Franco didn't mind. Instead, he took the initiative to turn around and head to the sewage facility control panel. I saw Franco fiddling on the control panel for a while and then froze in front of it. Franco, who took off his hood, scratched his already small hair and murmured in a bewildered voice, holding a manual in his hand. Something's wrong, why can't this door be closed? Of course, the culprit of this matter is clearly known for what. I saw Carl dividing 3 by 5, suppressing various irritating odors from his nose and eliminating the compressed biscuits provided by Franco. He then turned around and walked back to the entrance door. And seeing this situation, Franco didn't say a word more. Franco has seen too many people like Carl. That biscuit is just Carl, and the reward for helping him eliminate that dirt hound is good. Franco thought to himself as he fiddled with the malfunctioning control lever. But soon it was Franco's turn to look bewildered. I saw Carl running behind the door, tinkering with some lines that Franco couldn't understand, and the door began to slowly descend. At this moment, Franco's lever was still in the up gear. Obviously, this thing cannot have been repaired by oneself. So Franco looked at Carl with a strange look in his eyes. You know how to manipulate these machines, why are you here? Looking at Franco, who didn't even notice his cigarette falling to the ground, Carl could only respond in silence. Carl doesn't know how to explain his identity. In fact, this cannot be explained at all. A survivor in the bottom nest would never be able to operate these, even a technical priest would feel overwhelmed by the ancient machinery. As a pre-trial judge, Franco, who was extremely sensitive to these issues, immediately realized the mystery in this matter. Franco immediately pulled out a revolver from behind. This huge revolver was referred to by Franco as the judge. Over hundreds of years, this judge has put an end to countless alien and traitor forms. Every scratch on the handle of this revolver represents a tried heretic. And now, this revolver is facing off against the laser rifle in Carl's hand. Faced with the sudden smell of gunpowder, Carl could roughly figure out the tricks behind it. But without knowing Franco's identity, Carl felt inexplicable. After all, closing the door oneself is not entirely for Franco's mission. As I mentioned before, noise attracts the surrounding zombies. And the noise emitted by this door stuck in the air, no need to guess, has already attracted a large number of zombies joining the battlefield. Carl, who is pressed for time, cannot waste his precious time here. So the two sides froze in a strange atmosphere. However, this atmosphere did not last long. "Oh, it's just that. I'm sorry, I'm too neurotic." The final inexplicable confrontation ended with Franco taking the lead in releasing his left wheel. And this seems to remind Franco of something. Carl vaguely saw some yellow light reflected from saltwater in Franco's eyes. Carl, who was not overly emotional, did not ask further, but silently noted down this message. Subsequently, both sides once again fell into embarrassment. Franco looked at the cigarette but that had fallen into the pus on the ground and didn't know what he was thinking. Carl, seeing this situation, can only be the first to make his own demands. Looking at Franco, who was stunned, Carl said in a serious tone, "Take me up, I will pay according to the market." Upon hearing this, Franco didn't say much either. Silently stood up, gesturing for Carl to follow. Actually, Franco never thought that Carl would make the payment as scheduled. Because Franco was not in the mood to dwell on these small coins at the moment. Moreover, since his dereliction of duty, Franco has also been deprived of the right to become a judge. After all, for the trial court, there is no middle ground between loyalty and betrayal. So even if Carl's behavior is strange, it's not something Franco should be concerned about now. Franco had already lost most of his interest in this slowly dying world. Previously, praising Carl was purely due to conditioned reflex. For Franco now, helping the same heretics as him is what suits his identity. Of course, Carl is completely unaware of Franco's identity and current position. After all, for him, Franco was a temporary employer. A teammate with unstable emotions and a constant risk of explosion. Carl doesn't dare to take him in at all. As long as you can take Carl to the room with the courtroom logo hanging before, Franco's task is considered completed. Although Carl is not yet very clear about the market price for such an escort mission, he is sure it will not exceed 100 Skyhawk coins. So, with completely different ideas and positions, the two of them walk together towards the pipeline leading to the city of Dachau. Fortunately, with the blessing of the Emperor. Due to the temporary maintenance mode of the pipeline equipment, it has not been filled with the sewage for the time being. So the diving suit that Carl had prepared before was also considered unusable. To avoid trouble, he hid it directly in the control room. There was nothing to say all the way, but the destination along the way was truly unexpected to Carl. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. The Eagle is watching you. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. The Eagle is watching you. With Franco as the local guide, there were hardly any accidents along the way. Except for a part of the pipeline route, Carl didn't guess correctly, and the entire sewage treatment system is basically not much different from the drawings in Carl's mind. But at this moment, a question also arose in Carl's mind. Because Franco mentioned in his self-introduction that he is here to repair the sewage treatment system. But it is obvious that everything Franco did does not match his words and actions. There is no problem deceiving ordinary Nest residents with this thing, but in Carl's eyes, something is not right. Carl could see that the entire system shutdown was clearly caused by human intervention. And the administrator who was bitten is probably the one who shut down the pipeline system. But why did the administrator shut down the sewage treatment circulation system? He speculates that it is highly likely that the administrator discovered corruption throughout the entire system. And the sticky dark yellow pus on the ground is the best proof. But Franco deliberately ignored all of this. Carl was well aware that the instruction code left by Franco when he left was just a simple restart code. Such a simple operation is simply impossible to remove corruption. There is even a suspicion of intentionally spreading corruption. But maybe Franco will come back to fix it next time. So he could only temporarily put this question aside. Along the way, he could clearly feel the air quality starting to improve, and both humidity and temperature began to decrease. But that's it, for Carl, who is used to the 3K era, this is just a little better. Due to the reluctance of both parties to have a conversation at this point, Carl began to take time to observe the surrounding environment. Based on his mechanical knowledge in his mind, the area in front of him should have been a grid-like residential area a long time ago. As a second-generation standard grid format residential area, this entire block can accommodate approximately 100.120 people. Of course, the prerequisite for this capacity is that the block is working properly. But it is obvious that even the sewage treatment and recycling equipment is rotten to the point of today. Carl is very skeptical whether people can still live here. But soon he saw the sign that there were still people living here. I don't know where to start, but a large amount of garbage began to appear in the pipeline where Carl was walking. These garbage contained discarded instruments, empty packaging bags, and remains of unknown organisms. Obviously, these casually discarded garbage are of no value to ordinary nest-dwelling people. But in his eyes, it's different. Carl's eyes were like scanners, beginning to search for electronic items that could still be used in the waste. Of course, this is not for any environmental protection cause, or for low-end operations such as picking up garbage, repairing, and selling money. A brand new weapon is being rapidly designed in Carl's mind. Countless plans began to be combined in Carl's mind, and then were rejected one by one. Insufficient parts, high cost, low lethality, and inability to attack in groups. At the end of the entire design, a weapon that almost perfectly matched the current situation was copied and pasted by Carl. After considering all factors, the light explosive gun is honored to be elected. It has been proven that the design of lightweight explosive guns almost perfectly solves all the above problems. This is also why light explosive guns have been used in interstellar warriors and some interstellar armies to this day. But there is also a small issue here. The ammunition of a light explosive gun cannot be made from this garbage. As the saying goes, a clever woman cannot cook without rice. The mechanical cannon, no matter how powerful, cannot transform gunpowder into powder for Carl out of thin air. So he made slight modifications to the design of the light explosive gun and added a temporary bottom-mounted electromagnetic track. This electromagnetic acceleration track can launch electromagnetic gun shells, projectiles, with extremely strong penetration. However, the manufacture of this weapon was not achieved overnight. Knowing how to manufacture, there is still a considerable gap in the final product. Therefore, Carl only silently noted the location of these useful parts and did not take immediate action. Before arriving at the main residential area, Carl only made himself a robe. The main purpose of this robe is to prevent unnecessary trouble caused by the Black Mouse gang. But soon he froze. Because Franco took Carl directly to the box-shaped compartment with the courtroom logo. It's not quite appropriate to say it's a box compartment, it should probably be called a small house. After all, it is difficult to evaluate this building that is out of place with the surrounding box compartments. In a chaotic nest, apart from gang leaders, few people pay attention to the quality of life. Of course, as a nest filled with chaos and death, most people who can get here don't have the intention to do these things. And as Carl observed this small house, which had a slightly earthy pastoral style, Franco, who reignited a cigarette and began to smoke, said without looking back, "Here you are, you can go." According to Franco's idea, people like Carl should actually turn around and leave. After all, this kind of thief, as long as he brings it to the residential area, he will definitely go straight to his old profession. But Franco didn't care either. He casually took out the key and prepared to open the door. But to Franco's surprise, the footsteps behind him were getting closer and closer. "Damn thief, do you dare to steal me too?" But just as Franco turned around with a hint of anger, he saw a banknote. In an instant, Franco froze. That's actually 100 eagle coins. Once upon a time, a 100-day eagle coin was just a sprinkle of water for Franco. Especially during that period when Franco had just been dismissed from his position. Franco, holding a large amount of saved money, was living in a drunken and dreamy state in the upper nest. Maybe 30 years, maybe 40 years. Anyway, Franco can't remember clearly anymore. It wasn't until one day that Franco was thrown into this nest along with a sky-high bill that his soul returned to his body once again. Of course, the accompanying pains also returned to Franco's body once again. The memory of being expelled from the trial court still lingers on in Franco's mind. However, just as Franco was stunned by the 100 Skyhawk coin, Carl was the first to speak and interrupt Franco's lost thoughts. Take me to the nest, and this one belongs to you. If it were someone else, they would probably mock Carl for taking a fake. But this is Franco. Once, Franco flowers were like sprinkling water. From the golden double-headed eagle emblem and the paint seal of the Ministry of the Interior, Franco was very certain that it was a Skyhawk coin. This Skyhawk coin alone is worth 100,000 francs. It can be said that if a discerning person saw this eagle coin, it would be enough to stir up a bloody storm in the bottom nest. Thinking of this, for some reason, when it came to the bloody scene, Franco inexplicably felt a hint of excitement. But it seems to have seen the imperial eagle on the Skyhawk coin. The desire for blood was only a fleeting moment in Franco's eyes. So, after taking a deep breath of a cheap cigarette, Franco scrutinized Carl, who was draped in a robe, with a scrutinizing gaze. Finally, Franco sighed and said, "Let's talk first." End of this chapter. Chapter 7. A Touch of Blue. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. A touch of blue accompanied by the creaking sound of wooden door frames. After some hesitation, Franco ultimately chose to accept this transaction, but the 100-day eagle coins must be given to Franco first. Faced with such demands, Carl didn't care, and even for safety reasons, he promised to give Franco 100 Skyhawk coins after everything was done. Later, Franco led Carl into his room and temporarily signaled him to wait on the metal seat in the living room. So Carl took advantage of Franco's departure and began observing the environment inside the cabin, which was out of place with the surrounding environment. This place doesn't seem much different from some ordinary farmers in the 3K era. The simple metal coffee table was already covered in rust, and some moss-like dark blue fungi were crawling around the corners of the room. In the center of the room hangs a glass chandelier with only a few light bulbs still working. The same flickering lights as in the sewage treatment system showcased the poor electrical environment at the bottom of the nest. Therefore, a new question arises in Carl's brain. Did Franco see himself fighting against the Hound in such a terrible lighting environment before? Unfortunately, we cannot find a suitable clue at the moment, and Carl does not want to make any unexpected changes at this time. After all, now he understands that Franco, who lives in a small house with a courtroom logo, may not be so reliable. So, based on the principle that it is better to do less than to do more, Carl could only forcefully explain that the mask Franco wore earlier had night vision function. And just as Carl looked around the room like a curious baby, he ran into the neighboring kitchen-like room and Franco came back. I saw Franco carrying a tray containing 2 large stainless steel cups and walking out. "Do you want to drink?" Franco asked while holding the plate. Carl must not be in this mood at this critical moment, and besides, there is no safety here in Carl's eyes. So he waved his hand and politely declined, "Thank you, I don't drink." Seemingly surprised by Carl's answer, Franco's hand, which was tearing open a packaging bag, suddenly stopped. "I didn't expect you to be quite particular," Franco joked as he pushed the cup of white water from the plate, which had not been sprinkled with blue powder, towards Carl. Looking at the white water in front of him, Carl was a bit uncomfortable at first. But soon he realized that this was not the Earth of the 3K era. In the bottom nest of the nest world, a glass of plain water is enough to serve as the most luxurious reception drink. But Carl didn't directly drink the water pushed by Franco, but gave him a look. Upon receiving Carl's gaze, Franco immediately understood and took a sip of the glass himself. He then took out a few packs of compressed biscuits. The next commuter tram to Xiaoqiao will depart in 3 days. If you choose to hike, it will take about 6 days. How do you want to get there? Through the effort of distributing food, Franco seasoned his blue alcoholic beverage and asked Carl about his next plans. Upon hearing this, Carl bit a compressed biscuit hard again and asked, "Do commuter trams require identity recognition?" Speaking of which, Franco's alcoholic beverage has also been prepared. The light blue liquid lay quietly in a bright silver stainless steel cup, with a taste reminiscent of Carl's past bar. After taking a big gulp of the alcoholic beverage, Franco breathed a sigh of relief and replied, "If we go to the nest, we will, but if we need to go first, we won't go to the nest." Note: Tower tip. Upper nest. Lower nest. Bottom nest, then let's take the tram. Who is the other person in that photo? Meanwhile, Carl pointed to a group photo fixed in the frame. Under the flickering lights, this photo hanging in the center of Franco's room was exceptionally prominent. From the attire of the two in the group photo, Carl could tell that one of them was Franco. And another blue-haired woman, Carl, who was also dressed in courtroom attire, had never seen her before. Of course, this is just Carl's probing. Carl did not intend to directly inquire about Franco's identity, as it would easily escalate the conflict and cause him to miss the opportunity to quickly reach the nest. Among all Carl's filing plans, the rapid monetization of his 10,000 Skyhawk coins is the most important step. Without the materials exchanged for these initial funds, his plan had almost no chance of success. But obviously, it is much more convenient to use this indirect approach. If Franco refuses to answer, then Carl won't ask any more questions afterwards. Because as mentioned before, in Carl's eyes, the relationship between the two parties is just a simple contract. Of course, it's a coincidence. If Franco hadn't drunk that special liquor yet, he would have ignored Carl's question directly. But coincidentally, at this moment Franco had quickly entered a state of drunkenness. If it were normal, this state could temporarily help Franco, who had just taken on the order, forget the pain in reality and gain temporary comfort. But this time Franco miscalculated. This behavior, which has become a habit, coincidentally led Carl to come up with some intelligence. "Oh, you're talking about Felipe, she's a combat genius." Franco's drunken self-narration Franco and Felipe can be considered childhood sweethearts in a sense. The two were born on an agricultural planet in the neighboring star region. According to normal development, the two should have lived an ordinary life in the same planting area. Until Philly was tested for her psychic abilities during her coming-of-age ceremony. Part of the content cannot be heard clearly at the moment when Philly's spiritual energy, which had been suppressed for many years, was stimulated. The alarms on the entire black ship were frantically sounding. The captain of the black ship responsible for this matter immediately ordered the elimination of Philly. Until they saw Franco rushing forward, who should not have appeared at the spiritual stimulation test site. The entire psychic storm can only be quelled. To everyone's surprise, it was later discovered that as long as Franco stayed with Philly, her spiritual abilities would become exceptionally gentle and controllable. So the two were ultimately accepted by the trial court branch for record deletion and formed into a small group. Note: some star armies also have this type of psychic combat group, and they will share the burden of subspace together. And then just as Carl was about to continue listening, Franco actually fell asleep on the metal seat. In Carl's eyes, Franco is a complex of contradictions. Carl could see Franco's meticulousness, which was fully demonstrated in the first confrontation between the two sides before. But Carl could also see Franco's carelessness. It is obvious that if Carl were to kill and run away, Franco would already be a dead person by now. Thinking of this, listening to Franco's snoring, Carl also felt sleepy. After all, although Carl didn't drink alcohol, in reality, he hasn't slept for about 30 consecutive hours. Taking another glance at Franco, who was sleeping soundly, Carl also collapsed onto the metal sofa. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. The Emergence of Corruption in Gang Markets. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Gang Market. The emergence of corruption. Carl slept exceptionally long this night, slowly waking up on the metal sofa after a chaotic and indescribable dream. Feeling the slightly sore back from the diaphragm, Carl noticed that Franco seemed to have gone out. Fortunately, Franco left him a note. According to the note, Franco is going to the next block these days to hand over the task of cleaning the sewer and buy a ticket to go to the nest. Meanwhile, Franco prepared 100,000 francs and a brand new set of work clothes for Carl at the door. Putting down the note, Carl first went to the kitchen to pick up a compressed biscuit and a pot of already cold, hot water. Meanwhile, just as he was about to leave the kitchen, Carl found that it was filled with bottled water. However, Carl didn't pay too much attention at this time, so he simply used it as a reserve made by Franco when the water was cut off before. Leaving the kitchen, Carl began to replenish his hungry self with energy. I have to say, this cookie tastes pretty good. The crispy taste, combined with a hint of salt, at least helped him forget some of the disgusting scenes in yesterday's sewage treatment system. Due to the lack of natural lighting on the inner side of the nest, there is actually no rigorous concept of day and night. Even according to the clock on the wall, it was 19:00 the next day, which did not affect his going out for a stroll. Because there are still many things he needs to buy. Carl started thinking about what to do today as he rewrote his new work clothes with a robe. Walking in a tunnel that was not spacious enough, Carl surveyed everything around him. He found that apart from the gang members covered in scars and tattoos, most of them were wrapped in thick robes or wearing masks. And judging from their walking pace, the people here are generally in a sub-healthy state. Of course, this is not surprising. After all, the living environment of the bottom nest is indeed harsh. Along the way, Carl seemed to have found a relatively spacious space. Based on the standard block design, it can be inferred that this place used to be a theater or sports hall. But it's not important anymore. What's important is that Carl smelled the smell of gunpowder. But just as he was about to go in search of the treasure, a scolding interrupted Carl's thoughts. New here. Don't understand the rules. I saw a bald man with mouse tattoos all over his body, bare arms, fighting against a big stick covered in rusty iron nails and shouting at Carl. At the same time, the big man also looked at a small bowl next to him with his eyes. This small bowl is filled with banknotes and coins with a face value of 10 francs. Fortunately, Franco had foreseen that Carl would come out shopping, and had reserved a lot of change in the stack of francs in advance, thus avoiding Carl's embarrassment at the moment. For Carl, this trip was to buy strong gunpowder, and there was no need to make a big fuss with just 10 francs of crickets. But just as Carl was about to pay for the entrance, if nothing unexpected happened, it was going to happen. With a bouncing sound, all the people nearby cast their eyes towards the big man. I saw a bald man, literally, pulling a piece of land. It seems very embarrassing to be looked at by the eyes around. The big man immediately lifted his pants and dragged a long trail into the market. Carl looked bewildered as he watched the whole scene. What's going on? What's going on? Can I get in for free? However, before Carl could react, several opportunists around him rushed into the market. So Carl started learning with a certain attitude and chose to go for free. But just as he was about to take a step into the market, a familiar smell wafted into Carl's nose. Wait, what is this taste? This smell is almost identical to the mucus in the sewage circulation system hull. That's a trace of corruption. The alarm bell rang again in Carl's mind. Corruption from chaos has begun to permeate this region. But unfortunately, he doesn't have a good solution either. So Carl had to start searching for weapon stores first. After all, strong gunpowder cannot be found in noodle shops. The entire market is very large, and like other markets, these markets have many snack shops at the entrance. What kind of grilled mice and bats are there for everything? Of course, locals wouldn't even take a look at these shops. The reason is also very simple. Expensive. Local people in the bottom nest often choose to go to the deepest shops in the market. This has its own benefits for both market managers, gangs, and consumers. Just like the staggered escalators in shopping malls, this can allow consumers to browse more stores. Fortunately, Carl has just eaten enough and has no appetite for these bottom nest specialties. So he ignored the initial row of shops and continued walking towards the interior of the market. Along the way, the constant coughing tightened Carl's nerves even more. Suddenly, a roadside shop caught Carl's attention. Seeing this sign, Carl's hands involuntarily touched the dagger hidden in his arms. Damn the Black Mouse gang, they're actually here. Yes, he saw a slave shop named after the Black Mouse gang. But soon he calmed down. Now is not the time, and destroying the Black Mouse gang doesn't even require Carl's intervention. But this is also enough to attract Carl to take a stroll inside. Stepping into the store, a familiar smell rushed in. Looking around, Carl confirmed that almost all the slaves in this shop had been infected. And while he was observing the corruption situation, the shopkeeper greeted him with a commercialized smile on his face. "Dear guest, I have all kinds of slaves you want here." As Carl almost made a zongzi, the shopkeeper could not see his expression under his robe. So the shop owner continued to introduce himself with Carl. "This is a strong labor force area, don't worry, we have all brainwashed them. Now they will obey the owner's orders." After speaking, the shop owner deliberately showed the process of two fake machine servants working. Note: machine servants can be made by castrating the brains of clones, prisoners, or slaves, and have no human rights within the empire. Watching the clumsy work of the mechanic, Carl, who had the same level of interest as the mechanical sage, showed no interest and gestured to the shop owner to continue introducing the next part. So the shop owner took him to a hidden snow area. When the pink curtain opened, Carl understood what the good product the shopkeeper had repeatedly praised was. Glancing at them, it's a pity that almost all of them have been corrupted. At least for now, Carl hasn't thought of a suitable treatment method. But just as he was about to give up, a fainting girl in the corner caught Carl's attention. She was not corrupted. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Untouchable Berserker. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Inaccessible. Berserker. There are two main reasons why Carl can determine that this blue-haired girl has not been corrupted. On the one hand, due to the fact that slaves were not very hygienic, the strong odor of the same sewage treatment center had already spread throughout their bodies, but only this girl Carl did not smell any smell of decay. On the other hand, for some reason, the others around the girl deliberately kept away from her like they despised garbage. So Carl boldly made a guess. Perhaps this girl is a naturally untouchable person. Note: noun explanation. Untouchable. If a psychic is a group of people who can easily utilize spiritual energy in a subspace, then the opposite is true for the untouchable, with the most famous representative being the Silent Sisters. And this can explain both phenomena simultaneously. On the one hand, untouchable individuals are almost immune to psychic and subspace effects. On the other hand, the soul of an untouchable person is projected into a subspace similar to a black hole, which can even make ordinary people close to him feel extremely uncomfortable. This is also the main reason why this type of person is called an untouchable person. At the same time, seeing Carl's gaze fixed on item 999.41.1342, the shopkeeper immediately understood Carl's meaning. "Your esteemed guest, have you taken a liking to this slave?" The shop owner pointed at the girl and made an introduction while gesturing to the clerk. "There's a big loser here. You can hold back when you show it later." The shop assistant didn't say much and directly opened the cage and walked towards the girl. Although the salesperson had tried his best to suppress the discomfort all over his body, Carl still noticed it. As she approached the girl about 5 meters away, the clerk's body visibly trembled slightly. The appearance of this detail further confirmed Carl's conjecture in his heart. This is a treasure. However, contrary to Carl's excited heart, he remained calm on the surface, as if he was really just looking at a product. "Your esteemed guest, her appearance is almost perfect without any scars." After arriving at the girl's side, the salesperson began the regular introduction. And it seemed that the shop assistant knew why the girl had fainted at this moment, so he took a bowl of water from the side and prepared to feed it to the girl. Seeing this situation, Carl can't sit still. "Good guy, you're forcibly spreading scale and corrosion." So Carl immediately interrupted the salesperson's introduction and pointed to a row of machine attendants at the door, directly asking the price. "Boss, I'll take all these 10 laborers at the door. How about treating them as gifts?" The boss heard this and the cola bloomed. The asking price for strong labor force far exceeds that of these adjustment commodities. The 10 fake laborers reported by Carl alone are worth over 50,000 francs. Compared to that, simply giving a fraudulent product that is completely worthless in the eyes of the store owner is simply making a profit. So the boss readily agreed to this request and turned around to prepare to pay Carl. But at this moment, an accident occurred. Just as he walked towards the back of the store, the clerk who was preparing to give the slave remote controls to Carl was suddenly smashed into a literal meat paste by a spiked iron rod. In an instant, the slave shops, which were originally considered orderly, became chaotic. And Carl also saw the person coming clearly. That is the big man who was guarding the market gate before. No, he can no longer be called a big Han at this time. Based on fragmented memories, Carl prefers to call him the Berserker. At this moment, the Berserker held a blood-stained spike iron rod in his left hand, a rusty giant axe snatched from an unknown place in his right hand, wearing an indomitable armor snatched from an unknown place, with bloodstains all over his body like a god of killing descending to earth. Upon hearing the commotion, the 2 members of the Black Mouse gang who were responsible for standing guard at the door also rushed in. They thought it was Carl causing trouble inside, but they never thought it was their former friend who caused trouble. However, those who can join gangs in the underworld are not those who are kind-hearted and soft-hearted. After confirming the situation, the 2 bodyguards immediately pulled out their weapons. Small submachine guns with kinetic energy bullets. Unfortunately, this thing can only bully unarmed or lightly armored targets. Wearing indomitable armor, the Berserker held up his weapons with both hands and protected the 2 armor plates in front of his face, charging straight towards the 2 annoying mosquitoes. And the 2 bodyguards can only choose to engage in close combat when they see this. Seeing this, although Carl is an enemy, he cannot help but admire the courage of these gang members. If it were an ordinary person, seeing a berserk warrior would have scared them so much that they couldn't move. Unfortunately, the courage of foolish people is often referred to as recklessness. The operation of engaging in melee with the Berserker really made Carl feel a bit overwhelmed. So, taking advantage of the fierce battle between the Berserker and the 2, Carl slipped over with a shovel and picked up the submachine gun that the 2 had previously dropped. Without any breathing time, Carl immediately took out the magazine and began checking the remaining ammunition capacity after grabbing 2 weapons. Fortunately, due to the urgency of the situation, the 2 members of the gang may have only fired less than half of the bullets before. Seeing this situation, he breathed a long sigh of relief. That's easy to handle. So Carl began to hide behind the girl. At the same time, the bloody battle between the Berserker and the gang also came to an end. Accompanied by the crazy warrior's beautiful combo, the wielding spike iron rod and rusty iron axe tore apart all foolish people who dared to fight with the crazy warrior. Splashing blood and amputated limbs everywhere made all the survivors in the store scream uncontrollably. And as the Berserker walked step by step towards the next victim, Carl took action. Carl's submachine gun accurately hit the Berserker's knee. Although it did not cause any substantial damage, it was extremely insulting, so Carl successfully drew the hatred of the Berserker. So the Berserker once again wielded his three-board axe, protecting his head, charging, and fighting with his sword, body dominance combo. But this time, facing Carl, who had already set a trap, the Berserker was destined to give it in vain. Just as the Berserker was about to charge towards Carl, his originally steady steps suddenly slowed down. And due to the inertia of the body, the massive body of the Berserker began to tilt forward. At this point, the Berserker instinctively wanted to use his hands to support the ground, to ensure that he did not kiss the ground. As the Berserker's hands left, the tightly armored head that had been previously protected by Berserker's hand armor was now completely exposed in front of Carl's submachine gun. And at this point, the Berserker was too late to protect his head again. Meanwhile, Carl will never miss this opportunity. Press the trigger and teach the believers who contain dirt a lesson. 2222, the body of the Berserker, who had lost its head, fell to the ground with a loud crash. Fear and abuse gaze value plus 10%, fierce fixation value plus 10%, scale fixation value plus 10%. Shit, end of this chapter. Chapter 10. Harvest Preparation Before War. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Harvest. Pre-war preparation, good guy, except for that pervert, just gather all of them for me at once, right? Mentioning taboos, the gaze value of color and sin plus 10%, puff. But before Carl started roast, Carl suddenly found that his property sheet had changed. Carl attribute table fund. 9900 Tianying coins 100,000 francs power of hope. 200 fierce fixation value. 10% terrorist gaze value. 20% colorful gaze value. 10% scale fixation value. 10% skill. Mechanical Canon knowledge base 1/10 new. You have an imperial gift waiting to be checked. Killing a Berserker earns 200 hope power. The more Carl thought about it, the more things went wrong. If killing alone could earn hope, then the dirt hound in the sewage treatment system wouldn't be even more difficult to deal with. But he was very certain that his power of hope did not increase after killing the dirt hound. Strange thing, how can this thing be earned? Helplessly, after some contemplation, I still have no idea. As for the imperial ceremony below, he is not in a hurry to open it here. After all, there are many people with mixed eyes, and it's possible that the four gods might be eyeing them again. So he glanced at the trembling boss huddled in the corner and walked towards the boss whose brain had not yet restarted from the crash. Boss, you crazy subordinate has something. Do we need to recalculate this account? Listening to Carl's murderous tone, the boss instantly softened. While trembling, he nodded frantically in response and said, "You watch the math, watch the math." So Carl took out a 10-franc sheet from the inner pocket of his robe and placed it in front of the boss, continuing to ask, "Is that enough?" The boss frowned when he saw this scene, but soon he remembered the scene just now. The fear that had been slightly calmed once again spread in the boss's mind. The boss trembled as he took the 10 francs handed to him by Carl, pointed to the backyard where a hole had been hit, and said, "The controller is in the backyard. You can go and get it yourself." Carl didn't hesitate and went straight into the backyard to search for it. The boss originally thought that after the commotion just now, the controllers belonging to Precision Instruments would probably have been scrapped long ago, and it would be best to find a professional technical priest to recalibrate them. And the boss plans to ruthlessly slaughter Carl for the expenses involved. But the boss's little plan really went empty this time. Just kidding, would Carl, who has the same level of mechanical talent, not be able to handle a controller? So before the boss could call, Carl came out with a controller. The boss immediately pretended to be a kind reminder and grabbed Carl, who was about to start the controller. A controller can only control one worker. You can go back and look for it. There are a total of 10 here. However, Carl did not initially feel surprised as the boss had anticipated, and then ran back to be the scapegoat. I saw Carl casually operating on the controller, and then 10 fake machine servants stood up in unison. Ah, this. Seeing this scene, the boss looked bewildered. Is it difficult to say that this kid is from a mechanical repair club? Thinking of this, the boss immediately put on a professional smile. Just kidding, a bottom nest gang wants to touch the porcelain machinery repair club, probably their brain has been eaten by Negu. So after an unusually pleasant transaction between both parties, Carl commanded 10 servants to carry item 999.41.1342 out of the slave store. As for the other slaves, he had no choice. After all, even if Carl saved them now, he wouldn't be able to take care of them. Moreover, Carl at this time has not yet come up with a good cure for the spreading scale and decay. So he can only say that I am not a deity and cannot save everyone. Leaving the already chaotic storefront, Carl controlled 5 machine attendants with some change to buy a piece of clothing and some daily necessities for the girl, and then sent her back to Franco's residence. Carl himself, on the other hand, brought 2 submachine guns that came by hand and 5 machine attendants to the weapons store located in the middle and rear of the market. The process of purchasing weapons and gunpowder did not come up with any tricks. After some bargaining, Carl won 2 types of ammunition at a decent price. Shopping bill B.32s light explosive gun with 10 rounds *28 francs, prohibited ammunition, price doubled, 30 rounds of kinetic energy ammunition for submachine guns *10,000 francs, 2 free magazines, After making the payment, Carl began to go home with 5 servants responsible for moving ammunition. On the way back, he saw a large group of members of the Black Mouse gang gathered in front of the slave shop, seemingly discussing something. And the boss among them saw at a glance the 5 machine servants accompanied by Carl. However, the clever boss only glanced at it and didn't say anything unnecessary to the gang members next to him, so Carl didn't pay attention to these details. After all, being a first-line person, Carl didn't want to take the initiative to kill for the time being. Walking to the entrance of the market, the clocks hanging around the shops reminded him that it was already 23:00. However, Carl, who had only slept for almost a whole day, still felt mentally trembling. So he asked 5 servants to first move the ammunition of the light explosive gun back to Franco's residence, while he began collecting and making parts for the light explosive gun along the previous route. Carl hardly met anyone along the way because others saw the 2 submachine guns hanging from his waist and hid far away. After thinking for a moment, he finally decided to find a place to hold the imperial ceremony first. So with the help of the residential area map in his mind, Carl twisted around and arrived at a hidden compartment that no one else would come to. What's good about Hong Kong for me? Imperial rights medical machine servant, portable and expandable. Reason for gift. Corruption erupted in the Frankfurt B.13 nest capital, artificially delayed for 2 days. Gift postscript. Hope arises from despair, medical servants can treat diseases and remove corruption, but the root cause remains unchanged, and everything will eventually be destroyed. As the sacred voice in Carl's mind slowly dissipated, a golden crack was torn open. A box of 3M x 3M x 3M was thrown out from the crack. Looking at the big guy in front of him, Carl fell into contemplation. The root of corruption actually lies within the sewage treatment system, which is not a so-called tourist destination. But unfortunately, he has no other choice. What the emperor said is indeed true. Once corruption erupts in the bottom nest, it will quickly sweep across the entire nest like an irreversible torrent. By then, everything he did was too late. Therefore, before going to the next nest, Carl must first thoroughly remove the decay in the sewage purification system. With this in mind, Carl dodged and left the hidden room, continuing to collect the raw materials for making light explosive guns along the way. Damn Negu, wait for your grandfather to give you a light explosive gun and give you a bath. Mentioning taboos, adding dirt to the gaze value plus 10%, puff. End of this chapter.